thanks, Nancy. So I'll try to make a couple of points to get started here. And the first is, what is precision medicine? It actually is defined a lot of different ways by different people, but I think a useful way to think about it is, we went from an era before the 1950s where all decisions about medicine were made based on gut instincts by doctors or some other provider of some type with almost no quantitative understanding of what was going on. And it actually turns out, if you look at the United States as an example, before 1950, almost none of the improvement in longevity of people was attributable to organized medicine. It wasn't scientific in an empirical way. Then we went into the era where medical products became more developed, and we looked at averages doing clinical trials. Treatment A is better than treatment B, or is better than nothing on average. And that led to a set of instructions to try to use treatment A if it was better on average in everybody who had that disease. And of course, at the time, the definition of a disease was very much based on clinical observation, not on detailed measurements in people. And then, just about 20 years ago, a number of people came up with the idea of personalized medicine. And it's an alluring concept that every individual could have exactly the treatments that is perfect for them, given their internal and characteristics. But I think as people thought about personalized medicine and realized that in order to devise treatments and know if the balance of benefit is better than the risk, you've got to have groups of some kind, because there's no way with one person, except in symptomatic diseases, which we'll probably get back to, there's no way to know whether the treatment is beneficial or detrimental just in an individual. And in fact, as we begin to measure things, we see that the larger the population, things that were rare turn out to be a little less rare when you're dealing with huge sample sizes. So precision medicine, in my view, refers not to the exact treatment for each individual, but for tailoring treatment to people based on their characteristics in a more precise way. And that's going to get better and better over time. I think we all believe that. Concept number two, which I've had a lot of fun with over the years, is that you actually have a fun set of PowerPoint slides on this, but we agreed not to show slides except for the very difficult job of showing what the FDA is doing and making lab tests good. Basically, you start out with this group of people. They all look the same with a given disease, and you measure some stuff, and voila. After you measured some stuff, you can segregate the people into those who are going to respond to a treatment, those who are going to have an adverse effect from a treatment, and those who might come out neutral. And the question, of course, is what's the magic in there? And the magic is actually a lot more hard work than I think people currently realize. First of all, your measurements have to be accurate, which is actually harder than you might think, especially for rare characteristics, because all lab tests have error rates. Secondly, you've got to relate your measurements to something about people. And I would argue the hardest thing right now in precision medicine is actually what has been referred to as the clinical phenotype. How do we actually catalog people into different types of diseases? And many of us think we're going to go through this period now where the whole textbook of medicine has to be rewritten, because we'll redefine diseases based on all these characteristics. But as you might imagine, while this is going on, there could be a lot of confusion and a lot of missteps. But I think the biggest thing that people are going to make mistakes about is, let's just say that you take a population of 1 million people and you find out that people with serum porcelain that's low have a higher risk of some disease. I'm constantly running into scientists who think if you just increase the serum porcelain, you will fix the problem. And what we've learned, I think, in medicine, I think a very important role for the FDA to make clear to people is that things that look obvious in therapeutics work a minority of the time. Almost always biology is smarter than we are, and it's only if we empirically measure the risk and benefit in a population that we know that the intervention is worthwhile. So then two more quick points. For this to really work, we need access to big population data. So it's kind of counterintuitive because you'd think precision medicine will just do it based on little small populations. But to realize how to conglomerate the small populations into groups, you've got to have big populations with measurements. And over a decade ago at the NIH in the roadmap process, a number of us got together and laid out a roadmap for what needed to happen. And the key issue, if you think back a decade ago, this seemed unimaginable, but we were sure that by 2014, all Americans would have electronic health records. And guess what? That's happened. Technically, we're there, but unfortunately, we haven't quite figured out how to get the information in the shape that's needed for the purpose, but we're getting there. And the concept of a learning health system is absolutely critical to this. That is, when you have a healthcare encounter, the information's collected electronically, and that information then is available to learn. And I think a key concept here is to go from a concept of research on one bin and practice on the other to a concept where practice is learning all the time by taking advantage of the information. Now, the really scary thing about this, Nancy, to me is business has figured this out. So if you do a Google search, you're on average participating in 6 randomized trials. Google figured out a long time ago they can't make good business decisions without randomization. They call it A-B comparisons. In medicine, we're sort of behind, and I'm sure most of you had the same experience we were having at Duke before I left. We have information systems, we have EMRs, but your doctor's very likely to have head down trying to get the information into the computer and not getting a whole lot back. But the great hope here is that we'll reach a tipping point where this information will be available, and it's absolutely critical. Then the final point, the real moving force here, I think, is going to be activated patients. And it's been a really refreshing part of the FDA to see that devices, drugs, biologics are involving patients right up front. And companies are being advised to bring in the people who have the disease or problem in question so that your proposed treatment actually meets their needs. But what we're seeing with groups like the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation and the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation is that people who have a concern about their health can be the most powerful motivators of making information available. And I think if you watch what's going to happen over the next year, as you may be aware, the Common Rule is up for a new version. There's been, we're 3 years past the time that the proposed rule was supposed to come out. It's going to come out soon. And don't be surprised if it gives a big nod to patient autonomy and patient activation. Can't go into details on what's going to come out, but if you think about people controlling their own data, we know that Americans want their data used. They want to participate in research. The empirical evidence is showing the biggest impediment to getting research done is doctors aren't asking, and health systems are using all sorts of reasons like HIPAA to not make information available for research. That's not what patients want, and I think when that changes, this stuff will really move quickly. But again, the bottom line for me right now in my current job is we want to encourage creativity and innovation, but we want to minimize the number of people that are hurt by mistakes along the way, and that's a balance that we have to